So here's a wild thought. What if the crazy, chaotic storm of electrons inside a copper wire and the spacing of cells in a chicken's eye actually follow the exact same mathematical rule? I know, it sounds completely impossible, but it's a real concept called universality, and it's totally changing how we think about order and chaos. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to start with the problem itself. And believe me, it is a massive problem. Okay, so let's just picture a regular old wire carrying electricity. Inside, it's not some neat, orderly river. No way. It's an absolute blizzard. We're talking billions upon billions of electrons zipping around, bouncing off each other in this incredibly complex dance. Trying to track just one of those electrons would be, well, completely impossible. So that's the big question, right? If you can't even follow the individual dancers, how in the world could you ever hope to predict the behavior of the dance itself? It really seems like a totally hopeless task. But our first big clue came from a physicist who decided to fight all this complexity with an even stranger idea: pure randomness. So let's go back to the 1950s. A physicist, the brilliant Eugene Wigner, was wrestling with a very similar problem, trying to understand the chaos inside a uranium nucleus. He couldn't map every single particle. It was just way too messy. So he had this radical thought. What if he just ignored the individuals and focused on the statistical average of the entire system instead? And the tool he used for this was something called a matrix. The easiest way to think about it is like a giant spreadsheet or a blueprint. It's a grid of numbers that describes how every single particle in a system is interacting with every single other particle. It's the complete map, but an impossibly complicated one. And here is where he took this incredible leap of faith. Since he couldn't possibly know the real numbers for his matrix, he just filled it up with random ones. I know, it sounds completely backwards, right? Using pure randomness to try and understand a specific, complex system, but he had a hunch it might just work. And that wild gamble, well, it paid off in a way that nobody, maybe not even Wigner himself, could have ever predicted. So from this matrix full of random numbers, Wigner extracted a special set of numbers called eigenvalues. Think of them like the unique fingerprint or the DNA of that matrix. They boiled down its most essential properties. And he was looking for a pattern in this DNA. And what he found was a total bombshell. The eigenvalues he got from his random matrix were not random, not at all. When you put them on a number line, they were perfectly, beautifully, evenly spaced. It looked as if they were repelling each other, pushing each other apart to maintain this perfect distance. Out of pure randomness, this incredible order just appeared. This astonishing phenomenon got a name: universality. And that specific, beautiful pattern is now known as the Wigner-Dyson-Matha distribution. It's a fundamental pattern that describes these kinds of complex, interconnected systems. You know, the mathematician Horn Teaser Yao put it perfectly. He said Wigner's great vision was that basically any quantum system where the particles are all tangled up and influencing each other, what we call a correlated system, would have this exact same mathematical fingerprint. So how does this abstract math idea bring us all the way back to our original question about electricity flowing through a wire? Well, here's the beautiful connection. Electrical conduction, electricity flowing, happens precisely because all those electrons are moving in a correlated way. They're all influencing each other, flowing together. And that means Wigner's universal pattern is the unmistakable mathematical signature of a conductor. And what's so cool here is you can literally see the difference. On one side, you've got the math of randomness and chaos. On the other, you have the math of this hidden correlated order. It makes it totally clear. So let's break this down. In an insulator, right, the electrons are basically stuck. They aren't correlated. And their eigenvalues, they're all unevenly clumped together in what's called a Poisson distribution, which is basically the math of true, random, uncorrelated stuff. But in a conductor, the electrons flow freely because they're correlated. And their eigenvalues show that perfect, even spacing of universality. It's like two materials with two totally different mathematical fingerprints. So for decades, this idea of universality was an incredible, powerful hunch. But proving it was true for real-world materials, yeah, that was a whole other challenge. See, the big issue was that Wigner's original model was, well, it was a little too simple. It assumed that every single particle could interact with every other particle in the system no matter how far apart they were. That's just not realistic. In a real wire, an electron mostly just interacts with its immediate neighbors. But the scientific progress has been steady. First, about a decade ago, mathematicians finally managed to prove that universality holds true for Wigner's simplified model. That was a huge deal. But the real prize was proving it for a more realistic one. And just recently, a team of mathematicians, Paul Bourgade, Hongther Yau, and Jun Yin, they did it. They got the proof. Their breakthrough works for something called random bound matrices. And what's important here is that this is a much better model for reality because it restricts those particles to only interacting with their local neighbors. And even with that more realistic rule in place, they proved that the signature of universality still holds strong. This was the final mathematical confirmation everyone had been waiting for. And this is where it just gets mind-bending, because this isn't just about physics. This exact same statistical pattern, this universality, has been found all over the place. In the frequency of avalanches, the arrival times of buses in Mexico, and yes, even in the spacing of photoreceptor cells in a chicken's eye. All of these are complex systems where the parts are all connected. It just proves that deep down, beneath the surface of so many systems that look chaotic, there's often a simple, elegant, and universal rule hiding in plain sight. And it leaves you with this really fascinating question. What other complex parts of our world, from financial markets to entire ecosystems, are just waiting for us to discover the simple, universal pattern they've been following all along?